The creek behind my house moves the way time should, unhurried, certain, carrying leaves and secrets downstream. Some mornings, when the fog clings low to the water, I can almost believe the past was a dream. Almost. This morning, the sky over Cedar Springs burns with the kind of red that fishermen call sailor's warning. It stains the kitchen walls as I pour my coffee, steam rising from the cup like a spirit unwilling to leave. My hands know this ritual without thought. Grind the beans, boil the kettle, stir in the sugar until it dissolves into a dark, sweet promise. I'm 67 now. People here call me Miss Martha. They think of me as the woman with the herb stand at the farmer's market, the one who knows which tea calms a restless mind and which tincture soothes a grieving heart. They don't see the girl I used to be barefoot in the mud, counting the stars because they were the only things she was allowed to count. On the wall above my table hangs a row of photographs. My 3 children, smiling in that easy, unafraid way I once envied in other people's families. My 6 grandchildren, eyes wide with mischief and wonder. They're proof that a different kind of life exists, one built on trust instead of fear. But the red light creeping into my kitchen this morning has a way of pulling shadows out of their corners. I pick up the pruning shears from the counter and step outside. The garden is awake before the town, rosemary brushing against my knees, chamomile opening pale yellow faces to the cold air. My grandmother once told me that plants remember kindness. I've tried to live by that. To grow things. To tend what others might have let wither. The first bus of the day groans past on the road beyond the hedges. A few early risers glance toward my gate, not knowing that 30 miles from here, in a locked evidence room, sits an object that once ruled my life. A book. Not the kind you read for comfort or for learning. This one was red, leather-bound, and held no stories except the ones written about me. Each page an accusation, each line a weapon. It began as my mother's obsession and ended as her undoing. I hadn't touched it in decades, yet the memory of its weight still lives in my hands, heavier than a Bible, sharper than a blade. Most people think they know the moment their life changes. A wedding day, a birth, a death. Mine came on an ordinary Tuesday in January 1979, when a neighbor knocked on my back door, flower on her hands, and said words I hadn't heard in years. "You're coming with me." But I'm getting ahead of myself. If I want you to understand why a notebook could hold a person hostage for 8 years, I have to take you back further. Back before Cedar Springs, before the garden, before my name meant anything except trouble. Back to Millfield. It was a place where winters froze the river solid, where the church bell was the loudest sound for miles, and where every neighbor knew your business, or thought they did. My mother, Ella Lehner, taught at the only school in town. Tall, straight-backed, and wrapped in dark dresses, even in the heat, she had a way of looking at you that made you stand up straighter whether you wanted to or not. My father, Frank, worked long shifts at the plant and came home smelling of metal and whiskey. I had an older brother, Richard, the favored one. 7 years my senior, already wearing the kind of confidence you inherit when you've never been told you're not enough. And then there was me. The one who spilled things. Who forgot to curtsy when the pastor came by? Who asked questions my mother didn't think needed answering? The house we lived in was small, its walls bare except for a crucifix and my parents' wedding photo. The floorboards squeaked like tattletales. Outside, there was an oak tree with roots deep enough to hold the whole yard together. I used to hide there, knees to my chest, inventing worlds where mothers didn't keep ledgers of their children's sins. It started the year I turned 13. A glass slipped from my wet hands and shattered on the floor. My mother left the room without a word and came back with that red book. She wrote slowly, pressing the pencil so hard the paper nearly tore. Then she looked at me and said, "God sees everything, but I help him remember." I didn't know then that she meant every week. I didn't know that the red book would grow heavier year by year, that each entry would come with a punishment planned and carried out with precision. And I didn't know, not yet, that one day, the very thing meant to destroy me would be the weapon I used to walk out the door and never return. If you'd like, I can now continue with Section 2, which would dive into Millfield life, the notebook's tightening grip, and the first real signs of danger. That's where the tension will begin to coil. In Millfield, rules didn't need to be written down for most folks. They were stitched into the fabric of the town. Say yes, sir, to the pastor. Keep your lawn tidy. Don't air your troubles where others can hear. But in my house, rules weren't just understood. They were documented. The first page of the Red Book read, "The Lord helps those who help themselves, and He corrects those who stray." Below it, in my mother's neat script, were my name, my date of birth, and the words, "Faults to be amended before womanhood." At 13, I didn't know what amended meant. I learned quickly. The days in our house moved with mechanical precision. At dawn, my father's boots thudded across the floor, the smell of coffee already sharp in the air. My mother's voice would cut through the thin walls, "Martha, up." I'd rise before the light, pad barefoot into the kitchen, and start the fire in the stove. By the time Richard came down, yawning, I'd have breakfast ready. He'd eat without thanking me, my mother beaming at him over the table while noting in her mind how my hair was messy or my collar crooked. At school, my mother taught me in front of others like I was just another student. No special attention unless I got something wrong. Then her eyes would sharpen, and I knew an entry was already forming in her mind for that night. The book lived in a wooden box in my parents' bedroom, but I didn't have to see it to feel its presence. It was like a shadow at my shoulder, ready to record any stumble. The punishments didn't always come right away. That was worse. It meant a week of waiting, of trying to guess what might be chosen for Saturday. My mother would read each entry aloud in the living room, her voice calm, almost tender, as if she were reciting scripture. My father would sit back in his armchair, nodding. Richard leaned against the wall, smirking. Then my mother would say, "We'll address these now," and the night would close in like a trap. It didn't take long to learn that perfection didn't matter. Even on weeks when I did everything right, she found something, a loose thread in my sewing, a hesitation before answering, a look she decided was disrespectful. The rules weren't there to be followed, they were there to be broken so the punishments could continue. There were moments when I forgot, tiny, dangerous moments. One was the 4th of July that year. Millfield wasn't much, but it knew how to throw a parade. Flags lined Main Street, children ran barefoot with sparklers, and for a few hours, even my father laughed. I stood with my best friend, Susan, a storekeeper's daughter who smelled faintly of soap and cinnamon from her family's pantry. We whispered about the possibility of going to the county fair that autumn, maybe even seeing a band play. But when I got home, the book was waiting. Spoke to Mr. O'Brien's son in public. Laughing like a flirt. Needs correction. That Saturday was one of the bad ones. After that, I learned to tuck my laughter away like contraband. Sometimes, on the walk home from school, Susan would try to coax it out of me. "You'll get out one day," she'd say, skipping a rock across the creek. "You'll see the ocean. You'll dance in a real ballroom. You'll," her voice would soften. "You'll be happy, Martha." I wanted to believe her. But belief was dangerous in our house. My mother said hope made people lazy. "We are not dreamers," she told me once as she folded laundry with sharp, precise movements. "We are workers. We obey." Nights were the worst. I'd lie in my narrow bed, the wind pushing against the shutters, and hear the faint scratching of her pencil in the other room. I didn't need to wonder whose name she was writing. I'd tell myself that the book couldn't follow me forever. That someday I'd be older, bigger, free. But that thought would fade when I remembered the sound of its cover closing, that heavy clap that seemed to say case closed. And yet, every so often, a thought would slip in, quick as a mouse. If the book was the law in our house, what would happen if the law was turned against her? I didn't know it yet, but the seed had already been planted. All it needed was the right season to grow. If you want, I can make Section 3 ramp the tension further, the notebook's power tightening, small acts of resistance forming, and the first irreversible turn toward escape. January in Millfield felt like living inside a locked icebox. The river froze into glass, the air smelled of iron, and the cold seemed to sharpen every sound. That morning, the church bell's clang cut straight through me. It was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which meant two things in our house. We dressed in our stiffest clothes, and my mother made sure we were seen at the church service. Appearances mattered to her more than prayer. She fussed over Richard's collar, smoothed my father's coat, then glanced at me. "Stand up straight," she said, as if that could iron the shame from her view of me. The service was long, the kind where the minister's words rolled over the pews like slow waves. I counted the stained glass panes to keep from squirming. The red in the glass caught the winter light just right, and for a moment it looked exactly like the leather of the notebook. My stomach tightened. Afterward, we shuffled down the icy steps into the crisp air. That's when my mother surprised me. "We're stopping by Mrs. Carpenter's," she announced. "She's bedridden. Martha, you'll go home and start lunch. We'll be back." It was such a small thing, but my chest went hot and cold all at once. They never left me alone. I nodded, careful not to show anything in my face. We walked the first block together, then they turned down Maple Street toward the old teacher's house. I stood there for a second, the wind cutting through my coat. Then I moved. Inside the empty house, every sound felt dangerous, the groan of the floorboards, the faint creak of the wind at the eaves. I went straight to their bedroom. My hands knew where to go before my mind caught up, bottom of the wardrobe, under the wooden box with the brass latch. The red book lay inside, heavier than I remembered, as if years of my life were bound inside it. I sat on the edge of my bed and opened it. It was all there. Every insult turned into a line of ink. Every mistake, a glass broken, a dress hemmed unevenly, a look considered insolent, paired with its punishment. Martha, age 14, answered back. Corrected by father. Martha, age 16, attempted to leave home. Punishment complete by father and brother. I'd lived every entry, but reading them was like seeing my own autopsy before I'd died. I don't know how long I sat there, my breath fogging in the cold air of the room. A knock jolted me. I shoved the book under my mattress and opened the door. Mrs. Johnson stood there, cheeks pink from the cold, a bag of flour in her hands. "Thought you could use this," she said, stepping inside. Her eyes darted over my face the way they always did, as if she were reading a language no one else could see. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she murmured. I didn't mean to speak. The words slid out before I could stop them. "What would you do if you had proof of something terrible?" She set the flour on the table, then looked me dead in the eye. "I'd make sure whoever was suffering never had to go back to it." Something in me cracked, not in the way that breaks you, but in the way that lets light in. I went in my room, pulled the book from under the mattress, and set it in front of her. She read the first page, then the second. By the third, her hands were shaking. "My God," she whispered, voice thick. "My God, child." Her eyes lifted to mine, and I saw something fierce there, the way a mother bear must look when someone threatens her cub. "You're not spending another night in this house." Panic flared in me. "They'll find me, not if I have anything to say about it. My nephew's a deputy in Lakeville. He'll come. We'll take this with us." She tapped the book. "This is enough to burn the whole house of lies down." The sound of voices outside made my blood run cold. My family was coming back. Mrs. Johnson moved faster than I'd ever seen her. She slid the book into her apron. "Tomorrow morning, you walk to my place for eggs. Bring a bundle, small enough to hide. We leave before they know you're gone." She slipped out the back as the front door opened and my mother's voice filled the hallway. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the house breathing around me. I wasn't sure if I'd make it through the night without giving myself away. But for the first time in years, I knew exactly what the next day would bring. A door was opening, and I was going to walk through it. If you'd like, I can take Section 4 into the escape itself, a tense, cinematic sequence of departure and the immediate aftermath of leaving Millfield. Dawn came without warning, no slow easing of darkness, just a gray light seeping through the curtains like cold water. I'd barely slept. Every sound in the house had been magnified in the night, the settling of the walls, Richard snoring down the hall, my father's cough. I'd lain there, heart pounding, convinced they could hear the plan in my head. The small bundle was ready, hidden under the bed, a change of clothes, the only photograph I owned of my grandmother, a scarf Susan once gave me, and the few coins I'd managed to save. I'd packed and unpacked it a dozen times, not because anything had changed, but because it kept my shaking hands busy. My mother's voice came through the thin wood of the door. "Don't burn the roast this time." Her footsteps moved toward the front. The door creaked, then closed. the house shifted into silence. I slid the bundle under my coat and stepped into the hall. Richard's door was shut. My father's work boots were gone from the mat by the door, already at the factory. I moved quickly, my feet memorizing which boards squeaked and which didn't. Outside, the air was brittle with frost. I kept my head down, eyes on the ground, as I walked the narrow path between our house and the Johnsons'. Every step felt like crossing open water with sharks below. One wrong move, and I'd be dragged back. Mrs. Johnson was waiting at her gate. Inside, quick. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. In the kitchen, her nephew David stood in a deputy's uniform, the red book open on the table. His expression was flat, but the muscle in his jaw worked like a slow grindstone. This, he said, tapping the page with a gloved finger, is more than enough to start. His eyes met mine. Are you ready, Miss Sullivan? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Was I ready? I dreamed of leaving for years, yet now the question made my knees weak. Mrs. Johnson answered for me. She's ready. David nodded once. There's a bus to Detroit in 3 hours. My aunt's cousin will take you in. You'll be safe there until the investigation is underway. 3 hours. The words felt like both a gift and a threat. 3 hours until I was gone. 3 hours until my mother realized. What if they follow me? I asked. My voice sounded small, even to me. They won't, David said. Once I leave here, I'm going straight to the county judge. They'll be served before sundown. Mrs. Johnson poured me tea, her hands steady where mine shook. Drink. You'll need your strength. We sat like that for a while, me sipping tea I could barely taste, David making notes in a small pad, Mrs. Johnson moving through the kitchen with the precision of someone keeping her mind busy. But the quiet wasn't peace. It was the held breath before a storm. Through the window, I could see the road that led back to my house. Each passing shape, a neighbor walking, a stray dog, the postman, made my heart lurch. Any one of them could be a warning, a message carried back. Finally, David closed the notebook. It's time. The walk to the station was short, but we took the long way, weaving through back streets to avoid the main road. The bundle under my arm felt heavier with each step, as if it knew it carried the weight of my whole life. When the bus came into view, a strange dizziness washed over me. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was something rawer, the feeling of stepping onto ice you're not sure will hold. At the gate, Mrs. Johnson pulled me into her arms. You keep your head up, child. You hear me? You are not theirs anymore. Her voice cracked, but she didn't let go until the bus driver called for boarding. David handed the red book to me. Hold on to this until you reach Detroit. Then give it to my cousin Margaret. She'll get it to me. The leather was cold against my palms. For years, it had been the tool of my destruction. Now, it was the shield between me and them. I stepped onto the bus, found a seat by the window, and watched Mrs. Johnson and David shrink into the winter air. As the bus pulled away, I saw the road curve toward home. I thought of the empty kitchen, the unlit stove, the roast waiting to burn. I imagined my mother's face when she walked in and realized I was gone. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid of her. If you want, I can make Section 5 the full emotional climax, the confrontation of past and present as Martha reaches Detroit, the investigation begins, and her sense of self shifts in a seismic way. Detroit smelled different. The air was warmer than mill fields, damp with exhaust and river wind, layered with the faint sweetness of bread from a bakery down the street. It should have felt like a new world, but I stepped off the bus as if the ground might give way beneath me. Margaret was waiting at the station, a tall woman in a gray coat, her hair pulled back tight, eyes steady in a way that didn't demand, only invited. You're Martha, she said, her voice low and certain. She took the bundle from my arms as if it weighed nothing. We didn't talk much on the walk to her house. My body felt like it was still back on the bus, vibrating, half in one life and half in another. Her home was small but full of light. Sun spilled across the kitchen table, touching a bowl of apples. The red book lay between us after she set down my things. I'm going to give this to David, she said, not touching it. But I want to ask, do you want to see what happens to them? The question caught me off guard. I'd thought only of leaving, of running. I hadn't imagined the next step. Yes, I said, the words surprising even me. I need to. 2 days later, David arrived. His uniform looked heavier here, away from the open fields of Millfield. He carried the book in a paper evidence bag. It's already in the system, he told us. The judge signed the warrants. They're in custody. I felt the words more than I heard them, like distant thunder through the floorboards. David went on, his voice clipped. Neighbors have given statements. Your friend Susan, she told someone before she died. They've confirmed enough to hold them without bail. The room tilted. I braced my hands on the table, feeling the grooves in the wood. They won't get near you again, David said. And that was it, the sentence that broke me open. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding myself together. My breath came in sharp bursts. Margaret's chair scraped against the floor, and then her arms were around me. I didn't cry the way people do in the movies. There was no sound, just a flood, hot and unstoppable, as if every tear I hadn't allowed for 8 years had been waiting behind a single door. The trial was months later, but I remember it like one long moment, lit by the white glare of courtroom lights. My parents sat at the defense table, Richard between them, all three in ill-fitting suits. My mother's hair had thinned. She kept her chin high, eyes fixed forward. The prosecutor placed the red book on the evidence table. Even across the room, I could see the familiar scuffs on its cover. He opened it, reading entries aloud, each date, each accusation, each punishment. The words were exact. Martha, 15, spoke to boy at church. Severe correction by Richard. Martha, 17, attempted escape. Complete punishment by father and brother. The judge's face did not move, but I saw his knuckles whiten on the bench. When it was my turn, my legs felt made of glass. I told the truth in the simplest sentences I could manage. I didn't look at them, not once. My voice trembled, but didn't break. The defense tried to argue discipline, misinterpretation, family matters taken out of context. But context was carved into every page of that book in my mother's careful hand. The verdict came down on a warm afternoon. Guilty. All counts. Sentences long enough that I knew, for the first time in my life, I could sleep without the dread of footsteps in the hall. Afterward, in the quiet of Margaret's kitchen, David set the evidence bag on the table. You want to keep it? He asked. I stared at the red book. Once, it had been my cage. Then it became my weapon. Now, it was just paper and leather, stripped of its power. No, I said finally. Let it go where it needs to go. He nodded, tucking it under his arm. When the door closed behind him, Margaret poured tea. The steam rose between us, carrying the smell of chamomile. For the first time, the air around me felt still. Not the stillness of fear, the stillness of a room where no one is waiting to hurt you. And somewhere in that quiet, I realized I was breathing differently. I wasn't breathing to survive anymore. I was breathing to live. If you'd like, I can make Section 6 the resolution, where Martha's future in Cedar Springs takes shape, showing the generational healing and her final reflection to the audience. The years after the trial didn't feel like a sunrise. They felt like a slow thaw, the kind where the ice melts in patches, the river runs uneven, and you're never quite sure if you can step on the ground without sinking. I stayed with Margaret for a long while. Her house was an anchor, every corner smelling faintly of fabric and warm bread. I learned her rhythms, the creak of her bedroom door in the morning, the way she hummed when she sewed, the gentle firmness in her voice when nightmares dragged me awake. She never asked for the details I couldn't yet give. She didn't need them to believe me. Rosalie, the healer Margaret introduced me to, taught me how to stand in my own body again. She spoke little, but her hands were steady as she guided me through breathing, steeping herbs, tending to plants. Life, she said once, is a thing you grow, not something you wait for. I didn't believe her at first. But then the seasons began to mark themselves not in punishments, but in blooms, chamomile in the spring, mint in the summer, rosemary in the fall. My fingers began to memorize textures other than with splintering under a belt. Years passed. I met Harold at the market, a quiet man with the patience of a stone and the eyes of someone who understood how much words could wound. He didn't rush me, didn't try to fill silences with promises. He simply stayed, until staying felt like safety. We married in Margaret's backyard, under a sky wide enough to hold the weight of everything I'd been through. There were no vows about forever. Only a quiet exchange of hands, and the understanding that love was a shelter you built one beam at a time. Children followed. Joseph, Emma, Thomas. Their names still taste like sweetness when I say them aloud. I swore they would never inherit the fear I was born into. I kept that promise. Our home was loud with laughter, messy with toys and muddy boots. Their mistakes were never recorded, only learned from. We moved to Cedar Springs years later, after Harold's dream of owning a shop finally took root. The town was small enough to know your neighbors, big enough to feel like the past couldn't follow. I planted my own garden behind the house, chamomile, mint, lavender, rosemary. The same plants my grandmother once taught me to tend, long before I knew they'd be the tools I'd use to heal. When Harold died, it was the kind of grief that doesn't rot you from the inside, but carves space where the love used to be. It hurt, God, it hurt, but it was clean hurt. I knew the difference by then. I kept the shop stall at the farmer's market, selling tinctures, teas, and poultices. People came for remedies, but they stayed to talk. They called me Miss Martha and told me their small troubles, sleepless nights, anxious hearts, aches that lingered. I listened. Sometimes I told them how to steep lemon balm. Sometimes I just said, I believe you. Now, at 67, my mornings begin with coffee and the creek, and my afternoons end with the sound of my grandchildren's feet pounding up the porch steps. Judith, the oldest, likes to help in the garden. She asks the same kind of questions I once asked, questions my mother would have punished. I answer every one. There are still nights when the past reaches for me. Sometimes it's a sound, the scrape of a pencil, the sharp clap of a book closing. But I've learned to breathe through it, to ground myself in the fact that the red notebook is long gone. It sits in some evidence archive, its power stripped, its pages collecting dust. I keep my own notebooks now. One for recipes, one for stories I don't want to lose, one for thoughts I'm not ready to say aloud. None of them are written in judgment. If you've listened this far, maybe you carry your own version of a red notebook. Maybe someone has been writing your life in ink you didn't choose, with rules you never agreed to. I need you to hear me. Those pages do not define you. Sometimes the key to the cage is hidden in the thing meant to hold you there. Sometimes the proof of your pain can become the proof of your strength. The creek outside my window never stops moving. It doesn't erase the stones in its path, it flows around them, over them, reshaping itself until the stones are part of its story, not the end of it. That's what survival feels like. And if you take nothing else from my words, take this. You are not alone in the dark. Someone will believe you. Someone will help you carry the weight until you can set it down. The day I left Millfield, I thought I was running away. I see it differently now. I wasn't running for my life. I was running toward it. If you'd like, I can now give you a full compiled version of sections 1 to 6 as one seamless narrative so it reads like a polished, cinematic story from start to finish.